I came to faith in Jesus in 1989. I had a series of events, happen in my life. I was pursuing basketball dreams, college basketball dreams. Those dreams shattered and that was my whole world. So I ended up back home, me and my best friend, and just living kind of riotous life, no basketball, nothing to take up normal living. So life just was partying, smoking, whatever we could get into. And I remember we both got jobs at the post office, and he came to work one day and said, "Hey man, I got saved." Somehow him and his mom got me to go to church. It's a little church in South Jersey. And I remember it was so small, maybe about 25 people, real intimate. And as this preacher began to preach, it started becoming evident to me, or so I thought, that they had told him something about me and about me coming. It was so small. It was just like, oh, he could kind of just come right at me with all this stuff he was saying from the pulpit. And I remember getting really, really upset at that. And I went back and visited, and this time it happened again. But this time the issues he was preaching about were things that nobody knew. It was just deep issues that I'd wrestled with all my life. And that day, just hearing him preach the gospel and his explanation of what sin was and the issues I was dealing with, I immediately understood that I was a sinner. And I also understood that I was in need of a savior. During that process, after, kind of acknowledging and submitting myself to the Lord, like I talked about those shattered dreams, it was like the Lord began to give me something else, because I was a part of this hip hop culture. I began to dabble in music, but I was in a church being discipled and really didn't understand how these worlds were gonna exist, because they seemed to be oxymorons almost, to be a Christian and to be a part of this hip hop thing. Something had to go. In the culture at that time, especially if you were going to do hip hop or represent the Lord in the culture, it was dominated by Muslim. Hip hop was dominated by Islam and by 5%ism. So if you were saying Jesus and you were unashamed about it in the streets, it was kind of dangerous. Me and a couple other young men, we really needed the Lord to, if this was the way he wanted to do it, he had to show up. We couldn't do it. We didn't have what it took to present to people what would be, attractive to them, what would make sense, in this life and in city life. But throughout the years, the next 10 to 20 years, he did just that. Like he allowed us to just bounce around the globe and be able to proclaim the gospel and be able to make disciples and be able to encourage people about the exaltation of our God. I guess after about 10 or 20 years of making use of hip hop as a tool to gather people and then to be able to preach the gospel when we turn the music off, and using the industry as a Roman road, we went on some tremendous highs. And then later on, there were some tremendous lows that came along with it as well. There were a lot of other things that happened that began to challenge the ministry. There were people that ended up getting challenged. There were certain scandals that happened. And so it was a really, really difficult time. And just saw some things change in life. And so after a few years, it was time for me and my wife, we looked around and said, maybe we should relocate. And then I met Pastor Howard. D. Lanier was someone who wanted us to come visit Christ Central, and seemed like a great place for family, a lot of families and kids. And so we decided to relocate. And I think unbeknownst to me at the time, and through a lot of different things that happened, I was really wounded and bitter and confused about a lot that had happened in some of the latter years. And I think Christ Central was a great place that God had sent me to. I think I got loved on in an incredible way by everybody, especially the elders and the staff, people that I would see every day and who I could confess like a lot of things that were going on. And more specifically, Pastor Howard has been an incredible friend. And I think the Lord specifically sent me to him, and he's really helped me through this time. The past 20 years, after being called in a church and prepared for ministry, sent out as a domestic minister to go along with a group called Cross Movement, to go all these different places, and now to be here. And also I had a role of, I ran the record company portion of what we did, so I did a lot of kind of executive administration work at the same time. So I find myself here at Christ Central as the DCO and been very busy over the past 2 years or so. But now that things are starting to settle down, I think I'm beginning to struggle again with what it means to be in this new city and to still have this culture that I think needs leadership. So I'm struggling a little bit with what it means to have my feet down locally, planted by a church, supported by a church. But what does that mean and look like for me now?